Would everyone please join me in the pledge?
We'll all go down together.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you and welcome to the fiscal year 2019 public budget meeting. We have tonight a joint meeting with the Select Board and the Budget Committee, and an opportunity to hear from the public about the budget thus far. I will go over quickly the meeting agenda just so everybody kind of understands what direction we're going to go in. We are going to just introduce ourselves up here, and then we'll have some initial public comments. And for initial public comments, that's just an opportunity for anybody who just simply wants to say something up front. You don't have to do that. If we don't have any initial public comments, we'll certainly entertain them later on because there's a couple other places to speak. We'll have a presentation of the current budget draft, the latest budget draft, and during that period of time, we'd rather not get into debating or talking or addressing the budget, other than I do want to make sure we entertain any questions that are simply of a declarative nature. And then following that, we'll have a general discussion where you can say, I'd like to take this item and talk about it, and we can speak to it at that point. I think that's just going to work better for the flow of the meeting itself. And then finally, with some public discussion, feedback, and comments, we've reserved a fair amount of time for that, and then the Select Board and Budget Committee can also wrap up with some comments and discussion and perhaps areas that they want to look further into, and we'll adjourn. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the Select Board. This is Chris Salmon. She is Vice Chair of the Select Board. Catherine Woodsum, John Parent, Dennis Price. I'm Bruce Burgoyne. Andy?
And we're pleased to be here tonight, actually, to present what we think is a carefully crafted and thoughtful budget. And we are open to your suggestions for improvement. You know, nothing is ever perfect. We do the best we can, and then we look for ways to make it better. I'm Andy Tolman. Pete Davis is the vice chair, is having his knee fixed. We have Marty Hennish, Val Parmelo, and Ellen Schneider, who are the rest of our intrepid budget committee members.
Eric, if you just introduce the staff that's with you, please.
Oh,
and
sure.
yourself.
We have Teresa Shaw here, and I'm Eric Dyer, Town Manager. Teresa's
Great.
our Finance Director and has done a sizable amount of work putting this budget together with me, so
And you're
thank you,
here.
Teresa.
He gave me access where I was. So we have a number of goals that we kept in mind as we worked on the budget this year. Some of them are carryovers from last year, but some of them are new. We are always looking to make sure we communicate as clearly and effectively with the public, and we hear what they have to say as we can. Because it's what we have authority to decide, we are looking at the town budget. While we know there is a school budget, we know there is a county budget, and we know they affect the mill rate, we here don't decide them. So we're working on this budget, not in a vacuum, but this is our job and this is what we're doing with it. We also have been trying to continue to put capital investment into the budget where it makes sense, so that we keep we don't have surprises later on, that we don't suddenly find we need another $100,000 we hadn't planned on a couple of years down the road. We are trying to use both designated fund balances and the undesignated balance responsibly to keep our accountants happy and our constituents. And our goal is always to work together for the public good. So with that said, our ongoing goals are we're trying to minimize the impact of the budget on our taxpayers, spending responsibly where it makes sense. We're trying to do what the citizens of the town want us to do, to provide the services they've asked for. Select Board has a set of goals. We're trying to make sure that the budget reflects those goals insofar as we're fiscally capable. We're working with the town staff to be as creative as we can to reduce costs where we can, and still provide adequate services. One of those is we are trying to streamline the budgeting and accounting to put things in the places where they make sense rather than slicing and dicing in odd sorts of ways, which will help us to maintain our accurate record keeping. So we have had 14 meetings so far. And this is one more. And we're not quite done yet. We have a couple yet to go. We've had, I think, really good public participation, particularly from board and committee members at the budget committee level. We've also had productive interactions with the select board, and we feel pretty good that given where we are, we're doing the best we can with this budget. We have been through all the departments a couple of times now. We've tweaked, we've asked Eric to look at things different ways in some places, and we've also tried to make sure that we have a good flow of money and information from past years to the current years. Back to you.
Thank you. I'll just talk really briefly about the public budget meeting goals tonight. And I'll preface that by saying that I was a little concerned last year that we had a number of people who came to the second budget meeting to ask us to make changes to the budget, and that was really, and I thought we had explained that there were two meetings, one where you could recommend and discuss possible changes to the budget, and then the second budget meeting is really where the warrant has already been set, voted upon, and that's where you would say, I think that warrant item ought to fail, or that ought to pass. And that's a good discussion to have too. So this is the first meeting. We did try to explain that well in the postcard, and I hope everybody did get a postcard. So we're trying to communicate a little bit better and a little bit clearer as to what the purpose of the different meetings are. So that's what we'll be doing tonight, is to hear and answer budget questions, concerns, and comments, and to hear any recommended changes from you as well. We're open to hearing about that and listening to you, and we'll have additional discussion regarding the budget as we finalize it to get it into warrant shape, if you will. We'll discuss policy directions and objectives as well. We're going to review the budget generally. Eric will be doing basically a walk through the budget, and I'm also hoping that we will hear recommendations on how best to communicate budget information. For the purpose of the hearing tonight, like I said, we've divided into two parts: initial public comment, and then we'll have the presentation, and then additional public comment and feedback and questions and so forth, so that we can look at more individual items. So this would be a place to make a general comment. For the purposes of discussion tonight, if you would try to keep to about a 3-minute length of time when speaking, please introduce yourself. I'm assuming everyone here is from Reedfield. If you're not from Reedfield, you would need to ask permission before speaking. I think everybody is from Reedfield. Catherine acts as my timekeeper at meetings, and she will throw up this card at about 3 minutes. If it's more or less to remind me to politely ask that the person wrap up their comments. But 3 minutes is a pretty long time, so we should be good with that. And that's not 3 minutes per person forever. There may be some discussion, and you know, in the second part of the meeting in particular, you may have more than one item you may wish to address. And probably at that point, if we get into deeper discussion, we may decide to monitor the time a little differently. But I want to make sure that everybody gets an opportunity to be heard. So with that said, we are certainly open for initial public comment. And all I ask is that people approach the microphone, introduce themselves, and we're all ears.
Fran Zambella, Church Road. I'm
Unfortunately, I haven't been keeping up with the works of the Select Board and the town, but I have a question about the Church Road sidewalk project. As I look at the line items here, it looks like it's not going to go.
We applied for money that would come from the DOT to pursue that project. We had money that was voted last year by the public in a warrant article to set aside, because you have to have a match to do that. The DOT decided only to fund projects that were already in their pipeline, existing pipeline, and not to do new projects this year. I don't know what the state limitation was on that decision, but that's how they proceeded. So we would reapply or amend our application in the future, but that's not a 2019 fiscal year
So it's
budget.
not in the budget. I say it's in red parentheses.
No, the select
okay.
board did place that as a multi-year goal, and so we'll obviously be continuing to discuss that, but that's not something that's going to happen this year.
Well, one curiosity question in the process of aligning the project for Church Road, have the residents along the affected area been contacted?
No, and the purpose of that is they will be contacted. There is a process to go through once you've sort of been green-lighted to proceed with the project, and that would involve hearing from the public, contacting abutment individuals and so forth. And so that would be triggered actually by getting the project green-lighted, and we would have, I believe, a public hearing process and so forth in regards to that.
Well, my biggest concern is the trees along the, I guess it's the east side of Church Road, where the sidewalk is proposed.
The sidewalk isn't proposed for a particular side at this point. That would have to be engineer studied.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. So I
But
don't-
anyway, my concern is for the homeowners along the path of the sidewalk. How is it going to affect them? I notice a lot, on the east side especially, there are a lot of trees, and the houses are rather close to the right-of-way. And my concern is, are they going to have any input on the progress when time comes, as far as the sidewalk project?
That's true. Yes, they will have input. All citizens in the town will have input, and all of us will have input. And there'll be a process that'll be walked through. I'm not a famous person for liking to cut trees, so
Right.
we'll start right there. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comment? Those pregnant pauses are because I want to make sure that everybody has had their opportunity, so it's not anything more than that. Sir, you're welcome.
Just to follow up on this gentleman's questions about the sidewalk. My name is
Sure.
Ralph Eno. I live on Mountain View Lane. Is this proposed sidewalk area all town property, or will takings be involved?
As far as I know, it's all within our right-of-way.
Okay,
Yep.
so
I mean, that's the intent.
you've got X number of rods and you're within scope.
From the center line of the road. And again, this hearing is for this budget, but I'm happy to at least, address those questions briefly up front here so that people have a sense.
Has there been a tentative layout or design done
No.
that you could share?
No.
Okay.
The only thing is this old picture here of a sidewalk back in the 1930s or something of
So I
Church
assume
Road.
that
It's-
layout is a function of funding.
Yeah, that's correct. That's absolutely
Thank you.
correct. Once you know you have funding possibly in the pipeline, then you would proceed with public hearings and so forth. Are there any other general initial public comments? Okay, seeing none, we're going to proceed with Eric basically giving us an overview of the budget, walking us through the departments. And what I'd like to do is, as I mentioned earlier, the time to actually discuss items in the budget, question them, or make a recommendation on a particular item would be following the entire presentation, which we've timed out at 30 to 40 minutes, is that correct still?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. However, okay, that doesn't mean someone shouldn't approach the microphone and say, I don't understand how that piece of the graph lines up, or, you know, just a clarification question so that we know what we're talking about is, you know, as Eric makes his presentation. And by the way, folks up here, even though you're familiar with the budget, if you feel that clarification question would be good for the public or for yourself, please also do that. So, Eric?
All right, thank you, Bruce. I'll start with some revenue highlights. We always balance revenues and expenditures in any budget to ensure that we have parity. We started off the budget process by looking at valuation and the valuation for the town, and it's kind of getting a little bit loud. Typically, what I try to do is give a best guess at what the valuation is going to be as of April 1st. Obviously, we're not there yet, so a benchmark is a 0.5% increase, 0.5%. I hope and expect that that's going to be a little bit conservative, and we might see a little bit more than that, maybe up to 0.75% or more, because we've had a lot of permits come through, a lot of new parcels being developed, and a few very nice new homes, $1 million plus, going in some of the lakefront areas. So I hope that that is going to be a low number, but the more that the property value increases, the less impact there is on any individual property owner, unless you happen to be one of those folks who built $1 million house. So I'll start by saying that we saw a $42,000 increase to homestead exemptions, and that was due to the state of Maine hopefully completing their formula for matching municipalities. Last year it was 50%, this year it should be 62.5% of the value of our total homestead exemption. We are reimbursed. And so I'll just make a pitch right now. If homeowners have not applied for a homestead exemption, it can exempt up to $20,000 of your value of your parcel if you live in the town of Reedfield and have done so for the past year prior to April 1st. So please come to the town office and apply. It can be a sizable benefit, $200 to $300, upwards of $400, I think, this year, with the way that reimbursement's working. So, or exemption, excuse me. We have revised many revenue lines up. We always try to be conservative, and then as the years move on, we try to adjust for that lag. And with the economy improving, we have seen increases in many areas, and so those are positive changes. One of the largest is a $40,000 increase to excise tax. You folks have been buying new cars. Thank you very much. That brings in a lot of revenue for the town, and helps improve our revenue picture. The use of designated and undesignated funds has changed. Designated funds are actually up by $42,000, and I see that more of a calculated use of those funds. And we have undesignated fund use down by $90,000, and that continues this trend that we've been working towards of not having as much money go into the undesignated fund and not pulling as much out to offset taxes at any given time. However, we still always have the option to pull a little bit more out, especially this year, I think. We also have a big bump in bond proceeds, $177,000 for the Maranacook Lake Dam, and that is a project that has been in process for several years, but you will see the biggest spike in our entire revenue picture is that one little piece of borrowing. And I'll move on to the next slide here. This is another summary of some of those points. It does go department by department. A couple other things I want to point out here are that we have protection, which is primarily fire department, going down by $12,000, a sizable amount. That is a result of member towns to the Lakes Region Mutual Aid Association no longer paying premiums for antenna and communication improvements. That decrease in revenue is also matched by a decrease in expenditure because we are not, or we are completing that project this fiscal year. So that's the reason for that big decrease in protection, in case folks are worried. Others is road and drainage, a $10,000 drop there. That is because we effectively are out of the business of interlocal cooperative work, roadside mowing for Fayette, or excuse me, for the town of Wayne, and similar services. Again, there is an offsetting decrease in expenditure as well, so those are neutral. Going back to the top, I'll just note that the $78,000 increase in administration revenues, a lot of that is coming from, like I said, the homestead, the additional excise tax, but that's just a net. And the next slide should show a little bit better where some of those revenues are coming from and balancing too. Capital improvements, $175,000 increase on revenues there. We also have a $190,000 increase in expenditures, so we are making strides to improve in that area. And again, that's where that large increase in the bond proceeds is showing up, is in that division. Solid waste, small estimated increase in revenues there, again, in part to offset expenditure increases as well. Unclassified, we have a decrease in that line of around $9,000. And I'm having a little bit of trouble remembering what that's for right now. Teresa, do you recall what the unclassified, was that due to the change in the Reedfield Enterprise Fund?
It's what we discussed last time.
Okay, great, thank you, Ellen, yep. Yeah, and anybody on the either board jump in if I'm saying something wrong or that's not clear, so thank you for that. And then general assistance, we have a small decrease there. This is the graphic representation of those revenue changes, and again, I said that large spike is a result of the borrowing for the proceeds of the bond for the Marinacook Lake Dam. The administration, we have the $78,000, and this is just a visual of the things that I just described. This is and I should say, I'll back up one. This is the department level review. Administration is one of the more complicated divisions that we have on the far left, and the next slide is a breakout of those changes. And you can see there's a lot of stuff going up and down. I did highlight some of these. Starting at the far left, the first one, and one of the most important, I think, for most residents, is that real estate tax line, just about $40,000 there. And that actually, we're starting off by kind of giving away the punchline. That is the net impact to taxpayers for the fiscal year so far. So very modest in relation to our overall budget, but we still have a lot to talk about. If you look a little bit further on, the homestead exemption shows up. That's that blue line towards the middle. Motor vehicles, again, there's that $40,000 I mentioned. And on the very far right, you see those two fund balances that we utilize, designated and undesignated, with undesignated going down, designated going up, and that's a summary of our revenue pictures. This is a bit more detail on the fund balances. We have, over the past several years, tried to bring our balances back down to, at least with respect to the undesignated fund, a predetermined level that is equal to 2/12 of our expenditure for the year. And that includes the school expenditures, which is a sizable portion of the budget. So we have a very healthy reserve. And we do, I think, I've seen over the past several years, done an excellent job of trying to land on that dime of having that balance between the proper amount of reserves that we have per our policy, not having too much, not having too little. So we are working towards that direction. I will note that if you look to the far right, the 2018 and 19 fiscal years, those numbers are estimates. The numbers estimated for the purple lines, which is our undesignated fund balance, are much more reliable than the estimates we have for our designated fund balances, because We don't necessarily know how much or what projects will be completed by the end of the fiscal year. We certainly have our goals. But for example, that $45,000 in sidewalks that was budgeted last year, that is showing here as a decrease in that line. It's not necessarily going to be expended, but we did estimate that it would be. So these lines show the worst-case scenario, the most conservative scenario. So those balances actually, for the designated funds, are healthier than what shows here. And I'll stop there. Any questions on revenue generally? I went through it fairly quickly. Yeah, up to the microphone, please.
Revenues as far as state aid to municipalities is concerned, I didn't see, and I'm new at this process, a projection for what state revenues might be coming to Reed Field. And if there is a certain amount, is it reliable? Or if you're like any other New England state, do they tend to dry up or be promised and not delivered?
We've had struggles in the past with that exact situation. We don't know what they're going to be this year. What I have done in past years and what I did, again, carrying forward to this year, is to just try to keep flat based on actual numbers from the prior fiscal year. So we are at around $135,000, $138,000 in state revenue sharing, if I remember correctly. And
does that include education?
that does not include education. Education is, as much as uncertainty as we face as municipalities, education is twice, 3 times worse. They have a very hard time finding and getting reliable information, and it's a moving target even more than what we have to deal with. So. Teresa, could you check on that number for state revenue sharing for me? Was that right, the 135? 135, okay, yep.
And that's undesignated for any municipal capital expense?
No,
Or is it earmarked?
the 135 is that goes into our general fund. Yes, yep.
I will say that the state of Maine is in surplus territory, and we don't see any reason that they would make adjustments to our revenue sharing, except perhaps going up a little bit, but that's, we'll say.
We'll hope and pray, right, and probably be turned down.
I've contacted my legislators.
As have I.
All right.
Eric.
And that's one thing that people need to do, is contact your legislators, because there's money in the state coffers. And there's no reason why they can't fund what they've committed to fund to the towns and to the schools, but they don't do it.
Okay, we're ready for expenses, Eric.
All right, and I did try to consolidate revenue and be a little bit more concise in that area. I do have a lot of revenue expenditure slides and a bit more detail on each of those, because it does bear a bit more discussion. I'll start with the administration division and or department, excuse me. What I'm doing in these expense slides is going through by department. I have a few highlights, and then below those highlights I have the division level expenditures, and I will make notes if I haven't already bulleted them out as we go through that. So one of the first things that we see in administration is a $2,000 shift in software costs from assessing to administration. We have assessing software. Every module of that, other than the assessing module, was in the administration line. So I simply just consolidated that so we have it in one area. It's easier to keep track of, and we can more easily see the net impact of those cost increases, which we're looking at this year. We have some sizable ones. I think it was going to be probably $2,000, $3,000 increase this year alone. So for software, but. We also see an increase in insurance and labor costs. That's expected. Insurance has reliably been 4 to 6 to 8%. This year for insurance, we're looking at about a 5% increase. Labor costs, excuse me, negotiated about 2% this year. We also have in this department a separation of legal services to its own division. Previously, legal expenses had been caught up and not necessarily visible at the division level, and they also were not carry-forward funds, so we didn't have any ability to save money for future needs if we had a large expense. I see this as a way to balance out and buffer against any unforeseen activity in the legal department. We typically have around $6,000 to $8,000 of just general everyday expenses. Review of the town meeting warrant, ordinance review, any personnel issues that come up that need review. That's our baseline, but if we have a large expenditure, it could put us in a tough spot. So we are budgeting around $15,000 for legal expenditures, and that money, anything that is not used, will carry forward into a reserve account. So I think that's a positive change for us there. Some other things I'd like to note, we do have an increase in office equipment as a result of a new server that we'll be purchasing. New office computers, the servers under capital. That's right, Ellen would correct me on that if I didn't correct myself. So we also have in assessing, there's that $2,000 change I mentioned. We see grant writing and planning dropping by $2,000, and that's just a reflection of the fact that I don't have any planned expenditures or not very many planned expenditures in that area. In the past, we used that fund to buy things like GIS software. This year, we're budgeted to purchase a mobile mapping device to complement that. So overall, we're looking at a $23,000 increase for the administration department, which is a 5% increase, which I see as being fairly reasonable considering some of the increases in insurance costs and other expenditures. Moving on to the maintenance department, and this is a department that was created and separated out and pulled together from a number of areas last year in order to more appropriately consolidate expenses that truly belong together. And the divisional breakdown really shows that we have a general category, we have a building maintenance, vehicle and equipment maintenance, and then interlocal. The transfer of lease expenses from operating to capital budgets is one reason why we see a very large drop, $36,000 in the Division 30, vehicle equipment and maintenance. Only about 19,000 of that is a result of that transfer. We do have some other changes as well. Or actually, from the past fiscal year. I'll get more detail on that when I talk about the actual capital expenditures. So I'll stop there before I get into the weeds. But so that transfer has happened. Interlocal, again, we are not doing interlocal work in the way that we had previously, so there's a drop there. Again, offset was already discussed under revenues.
Oh, you got a question?
Oh, sure, yes.
Erica, I just wanted to point out something on the administration budget. If you leave out that $2,000 transfer for assessing, that was already in the budget in another department, the administration increase is only 4.2%.
That's great. Thank you for putting that together for me. On the spot. Yeah. Thank you. That's an excellent point. And appreciated. So that's the maintenance department. Again, we do have some small increases there for labor and insurance costs that do show up in that first line department, Division 10, general maintenance. Moving on to boards and commissions. We are planning for many, or not many, but 2 or 3 different multi-year conservation projects that do involve grant funding. We see a dramatic 352.8% increase in this budget line, and that is a result just of those grants. And as I note below, these expenses are nearly fully offset by donations, contributions, and other sources. So very, very little of this actually has an impact on the tax rate. I'll start off with the Board of Appeals. We have no change there. Conservation Commission, this is where a lot of it comes in. They are working on as is the town, a joint project to improve access at the fairgrounds through some trail work and expansion of the parking area, and improve access to our conservation land at Torsi Pond, the nature preserve there, through building, or rebuilding, I should say, and some small expansion of bog bridging and trails in that area. So we received a grant for, I think it was just about $32,000 to $34,000, and we have some town expenses that are being covered by that as well. And those are identified separately. Planning Board, we have a small increase, and I believe that was for publications and postage, but I'm not going to dig into details to find out. Moving on to community services, we have small adjustments throughout this department, a little bit here and there, but it all adds up to a small decrease. The shift primarily comes from a drop in public access TV, and that's not because we are not investing in that. We have built out quite a system, and I'll shout out to Bill for the work that he has done in building a fantastic system for us. We have some very great tools here that you can see them right here. We now have a lot of the equipment. We're moving on to the maintenance phase. We're no longer investing in capital. Much of it's less than the capital threshold, but we're no longer buying equipment, we're just repairing it. So that's the reason for the drop in that department. Small changes throughout, as I mentioned. Moving on to parks, recs, and activities. It's an off year for Heritage Days, and that's why we have a $5,000 decrease in the expenditures. Next year, that'll go back up to $10,000. So that's one of those variables that is seasonal, and being a biennial project, it doesn't show up every year in the same way. Additional community park and properties. We did add a division here, and this actually relates to that grant that I just mentioned with the conservation. The material cost to the town of adding some of the dividers in the parking lot, any extra things that we don't have on hand, say for example grass seed, some erosion control will be needing to come out of a project center, and we didn't necessarily have a division that was dedicated to town properties. We have a couple that are the purview of conservation or trails or other entities, but I thought it was important and appropriate to put in a more specific for community parks. So that's what we have here. We have trails, a small decrease, and Millstream Dam, a small decrease there. That's also a grant project that's being pursued, and again, that $8,000 is being offset through grant funds and contributions. Protection, we have completed or will be completing 2 large projects for the fire department, and that creates a lot of change in this single department. Overall, the net fire department reductions are just $2,000, although the tower sites under Division 35 and the fire department under Division 10 show a combined reduction of close to $46,000, close to $47,000. So a lot of that is just accounting, and the reason for the reduction is not a reduction in services, it's the fact that we've actually accomplished the goals we set out to accomplish, and we don't have to spend for those again in this fiscal year. We do have dispatching, small decrease there. A couple of departments, as I noted, or divisions, we budget not knowing necessarily what the full level of expenditure is going to be. Then we get, the bill comes due. The future years, we can base our projections on the actual numbers that we did not have reliably beforehand. This is one of those cases we budgeted a bit high in the past fiscal year, and so we are able to drop it a little bit based on our known quantities from the previous fiscal year, while still increasing or anticipating an increase in the overall cost. Yeah, that's about it. on this department.
Is the ambulance the exact figure, or have you not received?
That is an estimate at this point. Actually, no, wait, we got that about a week ago, didn't we, Teresa? No. That's right, we got the email.
We got Somerset
That's what it was, yeah.
So
and
this is based on last year's?
This is based on last year's, and then the actuals, again, came in a little bit less than what we had projected, so we can still accommodate about a 4% increase, if I remember correctly, Teresa, and still have a flat budget in that, in that division. Yeah, okay. Does that answer your question, John?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. How's my pace? Am I going too fast, too slow?
I like it.
You like it? All
Pretty
right.
good.
All
Just
right.
right.
Just right. That's what we're looking for. Cemeteries, this is a continued focus on projects, basically tree work, stone repair, and a few others. And the budget primarily covers the materials and contract work to accomplish those projects. So in the past, we had a lot of equipment expenditures and labor included with this department. But a lot of that has been moved into the maintenance department in order to consolidate and have a better ability to manage and keep track of those expenditures. So we can still, if we are asked to, pull out what the cost was for the cemeteries, because we do track the individual pieces of equipment as well as the staff time that goes into this. So we look at these expenditures in a slightly different way. We did this last year, and it worked out very well. I've been a lot more comfortable with my ability to keep track of things in this way, and it gives us a little bit more flexibility that if we have a priority project, we can accomplish it without expending, say, a smaller cemetery budget or leaving surplus funds in a different line. So just one note of explanation about how we came to have a slightly different structure than we've had in years past. And overall, they're doing a fantastic job, just up 2.8% overall. Roads and drainage, this one is a bit more detailed than what we've seen before, but we are continuing on with a second year of a multi-year gravel road improvement plan. It's actually turned out to be 3 years. Working with the road committee, they thought it was wise to wait and see what happened with some of the gravel road work that we are doing this year and will be completing in the coming fiscal year, to see whether we invested the same level of effort into what are some of our more peripheral and lightly traveled gravel roads. So I think it was a wise decision on their part and a good recommendation. However, despite that expansion of a 2-year program to a 3-year program for the gravel work, we are seeing an increase in the total cost of that program because last year when we put these items out to bid, we didn't have exact numbers for the costs when we put the budget together. When we got the bids in, they were higher than what we anticipated. That learning has been carried forward into this budget, so we have an increase in those costs. A continuation of temporary pause in asphalt paving. That is, over the past couple of years, we have stepped back from paving in order to focus on the gravel road work. Much of that capital that was being put towards paving has been shifted to gravel. So some folks have said, well, you're not paving, you're not keeping up with your roads. That's not necessarily the case. We're just shifting our priorities. And next year, that paving program will continue in earnest, and I'll show you where in just a few minutes. The increase in asphalt maintenance is commensurate with that pause. So we know that we are not putting an overlay on every year over this year and the next year. So in order to make sure that we're being responsible, we are increasing our budget for things that are maintenance related with respect to the asphalt, crack sealing, striping, things of that nature, shoulder work, where we might have washouts. We also have in this budget engineering dollars for a Giles Road bridge. Not a lot, just a few $1,000s, but that will supplement a significant amount of work done by the University of Maine, excuse me, this fiscal year, that is going to be a foundation for that that discussion and project to continue and be discussed. It's been on our radar for about 10 or 12 years now, and it has sat for about the last 6 to 8. So I'm very much looking forward to finding some resolution to that dead-end road with the Jersey barriers stuck on it, so we can all move on and find a solution that works for the community. And again, interlocal work has been addressed here as well. Capital. I'm going to take a drink of coffee before I start this slide. We have some busy business coming up. We have focused on capital projects this fiscal year, and I'm quite proud of the fact that the road committee and other committees have come together, brought forward capital projects that have been well vetted and discussed, and the budget committee has worked with town staff to come up with a 5-year plan that's fairly comprehensive, and I should say it's a much longer-term plan that goes out about 20, but we are focusing on just the next 5 years to make sure that we have a size plan that we can digest and work with, and that we're not missing anything in the immediate future. We had a great meeting a month and a half ago to talk about capital, and some very good suggestions came out of that. Moving on to projects, we have included the capital leases from the maintenance department, and that is $19,000. And I believe 16 to 17 of that is for the last year payment for the truck. Is that right, Teresa? Okay, yeah. I can't remember if it's the truck or the holder, because, no, it's the truck, I think. And then we have $2,000 to $3,000 in that number for the last year payment for the mower, for the cemetery. And after that, that zero turn won't be in the budget anymore, and it'll still have 8 to 10 years of life on it, which is great. We have a planned $35,000 expenditure for repair of the salt sand shed. I'm looking forward to getting that one taken care of because it's a very important structure. Again, the road committee has been fantastic. We had a site visit with an engineer last week. Actually, we had 2 site visits, and we're getting some good traction on moving that project forward.
And are those estimates of cost still holding to what other towns have experienced?
Yes, they are. Mount Vernon had done this project 2 years ago, and their cost for a similar repair, in many respects, obviously there are changes and nuances, was $25,000. And so I think that we're fairly safe with a $35,000 number. We may need to look at that again in the future because we might need to be doing additional work to our superstructure, the actual roof, that Mount Vernon did not have to. So it may be able to be accomplished within that fairly large buffer that we have, but we'll have to wait for the engineers to tell us exactly where that stands. If it does, I expect what we'll see is perhaps a 2-year project with, if repair is the recommended option as opposed to replacement, which I believe it will be, we could then do the foundation first and then the second year work on finishing the roof if those costs can't be accommodated in the budget we have. If the engineers recommend replacement, that number will not be anywhere close to sufficient, and we will have to likely bond for what could be $100,000 to $200,000 project for a full replacement, and probably closer to 2. So that's that. Saving for future road work, $15,000. That includes $10,000 for future paving and $5,000 to complete a 2-year cycle of reserve for the bridge that serves that goes over the stream feeding Torcy Pond. The planned paving for the transfer station access road drive is at $25,000, and that would accomplish 3 inches of asphalt, 18 feet wide, with a gravel shoulder. This has been talked about extensively, and I think that it is time to make that happen. Fortunately, we had already planned on updating and improving the gravel base this fiscal year, so this spring, we will be able to accomplish the base work, the foundation work for that road, and then pave either immediately or just after that work is completed. The decision will come down to probably a discussion with an engineer about whether it's better to let the material settle or to pave directly after. So still undetermined about when exactly that's going to happen, but it will happen in the next fiscal year. We are also looking at the addition of an attendant booth at the transfer station. Depending on how things go, we might be able to pull that through this year. I'd like to see it happen if possible, but we're being conservative in saying that if it doesn't happen, we definitely want to make sure it happens the next fiscal year. We are looking at the replacement of a roadside mower attachment, and it says $10,000. The last estimate I got was $9,000, but I think it's important to have a little bit in there for transportation, shipping, costs like that. This is so that we can continue with our roadside mowing program. We spend about $3,000 every time we have that done, and by a contractor. And so this piece of equipment would pay for itself within 2 years if the roadside is being mowed twice a year, as it should be. And we also have control over when that happens. We don't have to get in queue with other folks. So we discussed this with the road committee, and they were very much in favor of this, as am I. The Maranacook Lake Dam. This is where the full cost of Reed Field's portion of this important project comes into play. That number you will see broken out in several different areas in this budget. You see it on the revenue side, the $177,000 for bond proceeds. You see it in the use of designated funds, and I believe that was 123 or 125. Is that 125,000? I think out of designated funds that we have for it's 123 that we have in reserve that we have saved to date, and we also see in our debt service line $6,000 for the first interest payment and the cost of bond counsel. So this project, it shows up a lot of different places. I don't want to go into too much detail about the nature of it, but we've been working on it for several years. We have come to the realization that it's a fairly expensive project. We believe that it's a very important project because Maranacook Lake accounts for a huge portion of the taxable valuation of our municipality, and we have a responsibility to maintain that property value by maintaining stability in lake levels and preventing shoreline erosion and damage perhaps to some of that property. So those are some of the underlying reasons for the expenditure, beyond the fact that the town of Reedfield owns and is responsible for the maintenance of 54% of the dam.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure, yeah.
Do you have any updates for us regarding the progress Winthrop is making on this point?
Yes, thank you. It's a very good question. I actually was able to communicate with their town manager a week or so ago, and they're on the same plan we are. I think we just had a clearer vision earlier on. It took them a little bit longer to come to the realization that it was just not practical or feasible or cost effective to force the construction of this project between June and September of this fiscal year, beyond having an interest rate that jumped from 3% to 4.5% to borrow through a private lender as opposed to the municipal bond bank. The fact of the matter would be that contractors wouldn't be ready, and if they were ready, we would be paying a premium to get that work done. So they are now on the same time frame we are, which is a bidding process in the next month or so, initiated, following completion of the Department of Environmental Protection permit process in April. And once we have those bid numbers back in, say, June, we will then be able to go to the bond bank and say, this is exactly what we are going to need because we have a preferred bidder and a firm cost. Much more reliable approach. Following that, we will work with our bond counsel and the bond bank, they will issue a bond in the fall. Proceeds will then be made available to us, and we can begin paying our contractor for pre-order of parts of the dam, making a down payment, things like that. In May to June of 2019 is when the project will begin, and we'll hopefully have it completed by September of 2019. So a bit lengthy, but we're all on the same page and working the same direction. So this is what I just talked about in a different format. A couple projects that are going to be hopefully completed this year are the Giles Hall accessibility improvements. That's going to be some paving out front and the installation of handicap accessible doors that have the push button. So we have a little bit of engineering work to do, and then some capital work taking care of the asphalt out front, making sure that walkway is wide enough for a wheelchair and the doors to open at the same time. So that one, that's why that's not being continued next year, is we have it budgeted for this fiscal year. Parks and Recreation, that was, I'm blanking on what project that, the ball field. That's the ball field. Okay, thank you. That's the ball field project, which was wrapped up this year. In large part. We have reserve savings for the library of $5,000, reserve savings of $5,000 for the cemetery. The sidewalk, as you noted, is no longer on the docket because the money has been put aside and we don't anticipate expending it. It's just in the bank. And then those changes to roads that I mentioned earlier. We also have equipment changes, and I'm going to back up because I had a couple things that I skipped over. Well, maybe I didn't. Okay, great. Equipment, we have that $10,000 for the mowing attachment, and I do want to say there was one more thing here. Under roads, we capital leases. The $19,000, I was mistaken earlier, that we're done paying for the truck this year. The $16,000 is a replacement for the Holder sidewalk machine. Glad I got back to that one. The Holder we have now, it's a specialized piece of equipment. It's metric, it's German, it's very expensive to repair, and it's old. You add those things together and we're approaching $10,000 in repairs this year alone, which is approaching the cost of replacement over a 5-year period, say, for example. What we're looking at is to actually do a lease purchase over a 3-year period, and that would involve an investment of about $15,000 a year. That one piece of equipment, we won't be replacing it in kind. Those things go for $150,000 new. And it's much, much more than what we ever should be spending in this town for a piece of equipment like that. What we're looking at is a Bobcat, which is much more flexible and much more cost-effective for us. So that's what we're looking at right now. We've done a lot of work on it. We will be doing a bidding process and bringing some options to the select board for consideration. But I wanted to touch on that one because it is a sizable expenditure.
That's the last payment on the John Deere.
The 3,000, yep. So the 16 and the 3. Yep. Okay, great.
We should try to move along and try to complete the presentation in about 15 minutes.
All right, I should be close. Operating budget for solid waste has increased by about $20,000. And roughly half of that is due to increase in the cost of getting rid of our recyclables. As many of you are aware, we're having some trade disputes with China. One of those is around the acceptance of what they consider waste materials, we call recyclables, and that has disrupted the market, and we are paying much higher rates than we had in the past. The other part of this is transportation costs and labor and insurance costs. We expect that our transportation costs will go up fairly heavily this year because we've been paying the same price for the past 4 or 5 years, Teresa, without an increase. We did put out a bid for transportation and have opted not to accept any of the proposals we got because they were so much more expensive than what we're currently paying. However, I've budgeted to accommodate for that increase if it becomes necessary to pay it if our current hauler increases their price. And the backhoe, we have had increasing costs for that over the past several years, in part because it's an old piece of equipment, it's getting older. We do have that scheduled for replacement as part of our capital investment plan, I believe within the next 3 to 5 years. Moving on to regional organizations, we have a small decline in the cost of First Park. However, it's still a very big piece of this department at around $25,000, $24,500. And we are meeting with the select board, the executive director of First Park, myself, the representative, Steve Monselik, who is a representative to First Park, at their regularly scheduled select board meeting on April 30th. And we're going to have a lot of questions and hopefully a lot of answers about what our obligations are to that particular organization and what we can expect in the future.
The horizon is in sight.
It is in sight, and we got them on the docket. And county tax had been in this department, but it was moved to a separate department in order to separate out costs that we have some modest control over and costs that we certainly do not. Although First Park could be in either category, but we'll leave it right there for now. County tax. This is another one where we budgeted high, the number came in less, and so we're able to accommodate a small increase in what we expect we have to pay and keep the budget flat at $270,000. Debt service, small reduction overall. We have the Marina Cook Lake Outlet Dam expense, and that is that $6,000 as well as the borrowing costs. And I do need to look into that a little bit more. Ellen asked me a very good question before the meeting, and I didn't have the best answer, so I need to look at that before we meet on April 2nd. Moving on to the next debt service slide. What's going on here? Oh, okay, there we go. I was stuck. This is the debt service horizon, and it goes into a bit more detail and a bit more visual about where we are. 2019, you see we have a large a road bond that's being retired this fiscal year, or excuse me, in the next, let me back up here. We are budgeting for fiscal year 2019. In fiscal year 2019, we will see the retirement of a road bond. We will see the continuation of a fire truck bond as well as the road bond, a second road bond, and the addition of that small $6,000. You can see what little difference it makes in that big budget of the interest payment. We have some room coming up in 2020. However, we do have some projects that will fill that gap. Paving is first and foremost. Through a very careful analysis and discussion, we estimate that the paving needs of the town on a 12-year cycle are approximately $150,000 every year forever in order to keep our current level of service. So once that bond for the roads is retired, it's actually going to more or less come back, hopefully in the form of saving and a thoughtful planning for projects so that we can avoid borrowing and the costs associated with it. But very likely either one of those options will be on the table, but we're not going to be able to get away from it. Other costs that we will need to borrow for, that we need to plan ahead on, are buildings, fire trucks. You look in 2022, we have another drop as that road bond, second road bond is paid off. Just so happens that's when we expect we'll be having to purchase another fire truck. So we see some big gaps, but they're quickly filled by other expenditures necessary, I believe. And other things that might come up, one example that's been batted around is the library. Moving on to the unclassified department, we have specific budgeting for the overlay to include abatements at $15,000 and overdrafts at $5,000. We've always budgeted for overlay. However, we haven't always been specific about what dollar value we were looking at to target, and we also have not actually budgeted for overdrafts. We've always had a warrant article on the warrant, but we never actually put it in our expense line anyplace. So we've done that now and accounted for that, and it's in this unclassified line under the overlay. We've also added $50,000 for the property tax assistance program, which is being proposed. It's a brand new program by which we would utilize the proceeds of the sale of a property that the town foreclosed on from a bank last year to put together a program to supplement benefits that are received from the state of Maine for their property tax fairness credit program. And that will be scheduled to be eligible for folks that have a homestead in town and have a need by being a low income. That accounts for the largest changes in our unclassified department. General assistance, and this is our last specific department to go over. We do see a very small decrease here. However, we are keeping it fairly, it's not high because we don't have a lot there, but the utilization has been fairly low. But we expect we're going to have more need because the state and federal governments continue to cut these programs, shifting more burden back onto the municipalities, which has been the trend, as you're all aware, for the past 8 to 10 years. This slide summarizes all of those departments I just went through. I don't believe there's anything here I should be expanding upon or adding to as far as the discussion, other than that bottom line number of a roughly $256,000 increase overall in expenditures, again offset equally by revenues, some of which are tax revenues. This is the change by department. It gives you a visual idea of where things stand relative and overall. You can see that debt service is or not debt service, capital improvements is the big peak in the middle, and we've discussed all of these prior, but I just wanted to point out that high point. So here's some highlights of the budget overall. I probably got about 5 minutes to run through these if I understand Bruce's direction clearly.
You always do.
So I'll start by saying that municipal budget expenses are increasing by about $256,000 to $2,568,000 and change. This accounts for all of our expenses outside of school and county expenditures. The budgeted municipal revenue outside of property tax revenues also increased to offset most of those expenditures. So that's what I was saying earlier about the balancing act that we're doing. Use of fund balance is down, and that's the overall, if you look at designated fund balances being put up, undesignated funds going down, the net is a decrease of $47,000. So we do have a little bit of wiggle room there if we need to or choose to make a change in how that mill rate appears. My recommendation at this point is that we don't. But the net impact on municipal budget is $39,616. So that's what overall the increase is going to be outside of school and county. The municipal portion of the mill rate is expected to move from 3.18 to 3.32, just under 1%. So I think that's fairly responsible overall. School and county budget highlights. The school budget information is available on their website at marinacook.org/budget. They have an exceptional website with a tremendous amount of information. Their budget summaries are very well put together, and you won't have any trouble finding out what's happening with the school budget there. If the school budget stays flat, it will account for about 14.9 mils of the total mill rate. We expect there will be an increase, but we don't know exactly what that will be. The county budget will remain flat and account for about 1.14 mils. So, in summation, the overall mill rate, if accounting for the municipal increase and assuming a flat school mill rate, will be about a 19.36, up from 19.29 or 0.36%. And that's about right, because the school budget is about 70%, 75% of the overall budget, and we're seeing about a 1% increase in our small portion, which is about 18 to 20%. This is a graphic that represents just what I said, and it is an estimate based on expenditures. It shows relative positions within the three major categories of municipal, school, and county, and then breaks out the municipal component based on, again, based on expenditures. So this doesn't necessarily account for all of the nuances that have to do with revenue and what's being offset, what's not. This is based on expenditures. And here we are, public discussion and comment. How
Thank
do I do,
you,
Bruce?
Thank you, Eric. And first thing I'm going to do is just compliment you and Teresa for really, this budget comes together with, it's obviously board oversight and so on and so forth, but there's a lot of hard work that goes into it, and I really, really appreciate it. And that hard work is also administering that budget throughout the year. There were some things that moved from one budget line to another. It's really all in the effort to be as transparent as possible. And one of the things we're trying to accomplish as we move forward is to finalize the budget in such a format that it becomes sort of a standardized budget, if you will. There'll always be something that'll probably move around, but we think we have better bases for comparisons year to year, and we will have greater ability to make those comparisons as we go forward. So I think we've done probably most of the major moves that we wanted to in the budget to put things where they ought to appear, insurances grouped together and so on and so forth. So I appreciate all that hard work and explanations. Now we're really interested in any public discussion, comment, feedback, questions, observations. Please come to the microphone. Please give your name, ask a question, just give some feedback, ask about an individual item. That's the purpose of, that's the biggest purpose tonight, is for us to hear from you. Please, the microphone is yours. We thought sending out 1,000 cards would bring out a lot more people, but it didn't.
Well, the card was very helpful.
Thank you.
And I thank you all so much for all of your hard work. This is a very comprehensive document, and for the most part, very understandable. And that goes a long way toward helping people that actually pay attention to figuring out what's actually going on in their town. I have just a couple of questions. In Division 60, roads and drainage, I'm looking at item 10. Your actuals for road maintenance are in the $260,000, $220,000, $260,000 range up to 2017. And we're budgeting $117,500 for this fiscal year. I'm just wondering, given your actual experience, why are we budgeting essentially half that number when you have 3 years of experience and say it's twice that amount when you're looking at actual numbers?
So if I understand the question correctly, it probably comes down to accounting. In the past, road paving had been included with the operating budget.
Okay,
And
as opposed to a capital
as
cost.
opposed to a capital budget.
Okay.
So during our 2-year hiatus, we are still showing those prior years where we had paving coming out of the operating budget.
Right.
Once we get back on track and start paving again, it will not be in the operating budget.
It'll be a
in the
capital
capital
expense.
expense where I believe it belongs.
Understood.
Yes.
The public safety section, I'm not sure which one that was, but
On protection.
Yeah, protection. The dispatch number,
Yes.
you said that you're probably not going to be able to get a number until sometime after your budget is published. Is it based on number of calls and population? And if that's the case, why can't your, and I'm assuming it's a regional dispatch center, why can't they get you a number?
We have dispatch through two or three separate, three separate entities. And some of them are better than others about getting us numbers. We do have the sheriff's office amount. We don't have, if I remember correctly, the two others. Almost all of them, or one is a flat rate for the county.
Okay.
There's another one that is based on population and
calls, I imagine.
well, actually, I don't believe any of them are based on call volumes.
Really?
It's all based on pro rata of
As
population.
long as it's not grand list, who cares?
Yeah, well, we actually do pretty well about not having a lot of calls, I think, but when we do, they're very well responded to. But yeah, we just don't have the numbers yet. So what we've done is budgeted a small increase based on last year's
It's not a budget busting number to begin with. so.
experience. It's not. It's not.
The final question is, I like your capital layout for your expense planning, but I don't see a number in here for a capital non-recurring appropriation to save for these projects. And what I heard was a lot of borrowing to pick up exclusively the cost for these projects. Bonding costs are going to go up. We had a heyday for the last 4 or
We have
5 years.
bonanza, yeah.
But I'm wondering whether or not it might be prudent to begin setting aside a certain amount, given your healthy undesignated fund balance. Maybe earmarking some of that and shift it to a capital non-recurring account and build that so you're not borrowing as much when interest rates go up to 6 or 7%, which is going to happen.
And that's an excellent suggestion.
Okay? Thank you all again very much. This has been great.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Other members of the public?
John Perry, I'm from Chimney Road in Reedfield, happy to be a resident. And this is, I guess, a follow-up to that last comment. It occurred to me as I was listening to Eric's presentation that there are several places where we're putting money aside in reserve accounts for future expenditures. Not large amounts, but I think different from what I have been used to in the past, where we're setting money aside for future expenditures. There was some road money, and I can't reel them all off, but I'm just wondering if this is a philosophy that's going through the Budget Committee, the Select Board, whether my perception is right, and if so, about how much money are we putting aside for reserve accounts for capital expenditures?
As you said, it's small amounts here and there. I did tick off a couple. The cemeteries, we're putting away $5,000 for anticipated future work. The library, we have $5,000. What we've tried to do is get away from putting money aside for amorphous expenditures. So if we see something coming up on the horizon that we believe we can save for and accomplish, another item that we're saving for that doesn't show up under capital but shows up under, I believe, unassigned or unclassified, is our revaluation reserve. $10,000 a year going away for that. And that's been happening for quite a while. So I pulled up our capital and investment plan that we have and we put together and worked on over the past couple of years, but really came together this year. Just to show what we're looking at, we have lines that go out for, I'll try to scroll over here, but several years, and it keeps going and going and going and going. But the idea is that we are trying to be as responsible as we can by only putting money out for reserves that we have some reasonable assurance is going to come to fruition in the next couple of years. The roof on the town office is probably 20 years out before it needs to be refastened, for example. So we we are kind of putting some of that stuff out, but I don't think we're doing it irresponsibly. We're focusing on those items that come up in the next 5 years. So I just wanted to point out that process that we are going through and the rationale behind why we're putting away only small amounts for certain areas, none for others, and some we have major expenditures coming up and borrowing.
Well, personally, I'm a proponent of putting money away in advance, so I'm not being critical if that's the decision.
Oh, sure, yeah, no,
I'm
no,
just
I
wondering if
understand,
that's
Well, for example,
maybe a change of philosophy that's occurring here.
I think it is to some extent. As I mentioned, the roads, where's my roads spreadsheet? This is our road spreadsheet. This is every road in the town of Reedfield that we have responsibility for, broken out by when we think we're gonna have to repair it and what we think it's gonna cost. And this is based on a 12-year payment cycle. This is one big piece. I mean, $150,000 annually every year. As I noted, we are at the point, if we take that $150,000 number and plug it in 2020, the fiscal year after this one, we can accomplish, very likely, the first couple years of work through savings and not borrowing. I think that if we take this one area, which is a significant one, and break it out and very thoughtfully plan ahead, which we can do now that we have this basic information, we should be able to do this without borrowing. There might come a balloon payment. Say we, 10 years ago, paved 4 miles of road, and it's a very heavily used wide road. That could cause a balloon that we might not be able to accommodate through our savings. But I think that there's a good chance that we could accomplish most of it. If we had to borrow some, it might be a small amount just to make the difference up. But yeah, it's a very good point, and I think it is a change in focus of trying to save where we can, when we can. But on our warrant, there's an article, and when we discuss this at the select board meeting on Monday, please come. We'll be talking about one article in particular, the borrowing article for the Marinacook Lake Outlet Dam. And that one we did try to save for. We tried for 3 years or 4 years to save.
But we also thought we were going to do the project.
Yeah, and we also thought we were going to accomplish it for what we put away, but that was not the case. But that article includes a summary by the treasurer about where we are with our debt, existing debt, future debt, if we borrow for this. And then an item that compares, as we're required to do by state law, compares our debt load to a certain maximum that the state has established. We're actually at about, if we borrow this $177,000, we're at about 5% of our potential debt capacity, according to the state of Maine. So we are actually in a very, very good position, very, very responsible at this point. And I think we can continue to stay in that position. And we've had discussions about, are we borrowing too little? Are we putting too much burden on too short a time frame by doing 3-year lease purchases and by doing some of these shorter term projects in that way without perhaps bundling and borrowing? So we've had a lot of debate on it, and I think I'm very glad you brought that point up because it's been talked about a lot. Yeah.
One of the things I remember in this very meeting last year, hearing Eric say, was you have to find a good balance. I think we do a good job of not squirreling away such a large amount, because then you had to get that somewhere, right? You know what I mean? So I guess as lean with just a little bit, with a little bit of extra, I think is always it's what I've seen last year. It's what I see this year, and I like that.
And I've been a proponent of the discussions around borrowing, because I think borrowing is part of a healthy, balanced fiscal picture for any public entity, and we have very low debt load. And again, it is a balance between costs, as you mentioned, and spreading the debt over an appropriate amount of time so you're not unduly burdening a taxpayer in a very condensed period of time for an asset that's going to last decades. So you have to be fair in how you spread the tax base over time for those assets.
And avoid creating spikes and valleys that
Yes.
are so unpredictable that homeowners just don't know what their tax bill
Right.
will be.
Try to
Um,
level everything out.
That's right. But it's very good feedback that we're hearing, though. I really appreciate
Very
it.
happy to know the discussion is going on, so
Yeah.
kudos to you folks.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, and I guess my last point on that is that, we have looked at our debt horizon over the past couple of years. But it seems as though going forward, we're very likely going to have a much more stable, and at some point, we can probably plan around having a level of expenditure that's $300,000 to $350,000 every year to meet our capital needs, because, A, we've planned for them, we know what they are, and we can then balance them out, so, as Ellen was suggesting.
We're really trying to take multi-year focus into consideration as we build these budgets. Other comments from the public or questions or suggestions?
Good evening. Greg Durgan, resident and chair of the Trails Committee. And like this gentleman over here, I'd like to thank you all for your hard work. It seems like I say that every year, but I mean it. The Select Board has a lot to do, and the Budget Committee has a lot to do, and I appreciate your hard work. In case this gets a little testy, I want to have that comment up front. I really appreciate the work you do. If you would all turn, well, if you have this booklet, if you would go to the inside that cover, under Budget Sheet Summary Revision History. It's a beautiful title. Budget Sheet Summary Revision History. Jump down to number 25, please. And it says, reduce trails to 1808. And reduce their use of reserves to 0. I think I know what that means. Could someone tell me what they think it means?
I'll tell you exactly what I think.
Beautiful. And then I'll tell you what I think. Okay.
I think it means that when we had started the budget process, we didn't have exact numbers from the Trails Committee. So we had budgeted, I had budgeted, what I thought folks would be looking at, because you had previously requested $2,400 and change, $2,300. So I thought 25 was a fair number. And then your request came in, and it was 1,800. And in order to offset that, to get back up to that $2,500 number, we said, well, maybe they plan on using some of their reserves. And so we had added that to the revenue side of the equation to get, am I making sense? Maybe I am. And so basically, we reduced the 2,500 to the 1,800 that you had requested, actually, and reduced the use of your revenues that would have been the offsetting cost for that difference between the 1,800 and the 2,500.
So the 1,800 is regular expense in the budget?
The 1,808 was the budget that I presented to the Budget Committee in February.
And that's funded out of general revenues?
Correct.
Yes.
That's the point.
Without use of the reserve. The
Yes.
reserve was what we had plugged in. It was kind of a backwards thing. I don't know how we got there, but it's one of those little areas of the budget where we were trying to make things balance and had proposed use of the reserves, which I don't believe you had intended. So that went away, as did the excess expenditure.
Well, let's go back to Andy's comment about communication. I think a day or two after, I think it was February 15th that I made the presentation, Ken and I made the presentation to the Budget Committee. I sent you an email and I said, did we take any cuts, any changes in our budget? No, everything, I believe I still have that email. Everything was fine, everything done.
Yep.
About 3 weeks ago, I got an email from Marty asking me for clarification on our budget and the reserves. And I responded. And nowhere in that discussion was anything communicated to the Trails Committee that our reserve was going to go away.
Oh, it's not the reserve, is it? The anticipated use of the
The
reserve.
use of it's going away.
There's no taking any money
See,
out
you
of
get this
reserve.
budget, I don't.
All that I think happened was that the expense side matched what you presented,
Okay.
and that there is nothing taken from your reserve. Not that your whole
So even though
reserve
it
is
says use
taken.
of reserve account reduced to zero,
Yeah, the
So the
use is
use of-
reserved.
Right.
We're not
Use is-
using.
Not the
We're
actual-
using
Okay.
nothing.
so we still have carryover funds.
You absolutely do, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
my
So
original.
carryover and reserve are
You're
not,
using zero from
Okay.
reserve.
Yeah. This is almost like a note to to Eric, it seems, that he's,
Should've been a
okay, we
note to
did this.
Greg.
Yeah, note to Greg.
Well, I thought it
Note to
was,
Dirk.
because in my mind, that it was perfectly clear that yes, there was zero change, because in net, there was zero change. We had budgeted too high. I had made, I won't say it's a mistake, because we always budget a rough number, budgeted too high, and then when we got that 1,800 number, we said, well, maybe there's an intent to use some of the reserves. It was a confusion on my part. It was corrected by saying, well, no, we're not gonna use any of their reserves, and we're gonna use the number they gave us. So, I guess I was a bit too concise in my reply to you, saying that nothing had changed, because a whole lot had changed, but then it didn't. So, yeah, my apologies for that miscommunication.
okay, thank you. I was getting a little paranoid, I'm also on another committee, and there was a communication breakdown there, and I thought I saw one here, and I was beginning to think it was me. That maybe I'm the block.
We can stick with that.
We just tell you, we're not
Think
that,
about
we're not
stepping
trying
aside
to.
from both committees so
Yeah.
you can communicate with them, but I guess I don't have to do that.
Well, we will let you take responsibility.
John, you did a very nice job at the other one, so,
Greg, does that
Then I-
make sense? Do you truly understand, you know what we're saying now?
yes, now, the issue was reserved and.
Right,
carryover.
yes.
Okay.
You in fact are using no reserves.
Okay. So I guess, yeah, I'm fine, thank you for the apology. I still have another 25 minutes, so.
Yeah.
I want to go back to when Catherine and I were, no, you haven't held that up to anybody tonight.
Well, no one's
John
talked
Perry was
this
up here
long,
for
Greg.
27 minutes, I counted. You didn't make him sit down.
Wow, you need to watch.
Catherine, when you and I were on a board a long time ago, select board, we talked about paving the transfer station road.
We did.
And we did. Well, I mean, the town talked about it.
It was discussed.
Discussed, right. And I thought there was an engineering study done that said that road was not a good road to pave, that there were different parts of it. And,
It needs work. You had another study done, and they have told you what you have to do in order to build it up to be
okay, is that
able
going to
to
be done? Is that
park.
part of this?
That is in the
Part
current
of
year
this
budget
year.
right now.
Okay.
And the bid was put out last
Last fall.
summer,
Yeah.
fall.
Yeah.
And it was won by John Cushing. And he had hoped to do some work on that road in the fall, but that's not how the winter worked out. So there'll be ditching done and some removal and reshaping of that road. Right now, it's way too flat. And it's been a really big problem for anyone who's been going in and out of there on a regular basis. And Eric has heard loud and clear from the select board and residents and the solid waste committee that that road is causing some issues. And so that, all that reshaping work is being done this spring before July 1st. I
Yes.
think John committed to doing that.
Yep, absolutely. And just for a dollars and cents perspective, we're putting $20,000 into that road for gravel work prior to putting that $25,000 on top in asphalt.
And Wayne helps with that, right?
Yes,
And
Wayne
Fayette.
and Fayette. Yep.
And
So-
Fayette.
So we're responsible for about a half of that cost. The other two towns are roughly a quarter each.
The bottom line on that is we won't pave a road on material that should not be paved.
Good, thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
That's the bottom line, so that's,
I'm not against having it paved.
no, that's the select
No,
board's
not-
direction
How could you?
to Eric on this, and, I mean, he acts as the road commissioner as well, and we get good advice, and we have a great road committee that's given us, even though that's actually not a town road, that's part of the transfer station, we've gotten their feedback on this, so.
And another thing that has changed is that road is actually, Eric can be more precise with this than I can. I happen to chair the Solid Waste and Recycling Committee, so I know a little bit about this. That road is actually far too wide for its use, and so it will be brought in. And that, whenever you have a narrower road, that does help to control speed as well.
Yes.
So by having a nice, flat, smooth surface, you might expect that people will try to go faster. So by narrowing it down, that will also help people to go slower. And it will provide for better drainage, certainly, which will make the road base last much longer.
Can't go too fast right now anyway.
You can't really go too slow either. You can only crawl.
And my last question
Greg.
concerns First Park. And my only question is, has anybody ever found the contract that we signed about 37 years ago, I think, at $25,000 per year?
We have not, and actually the executive director did say that he would, try to bring it with him when he comes on the 30th. What we did find, however, was a bit discouraging. It was a 100-year lease for the property.
You don't want to hear this, Greg.
Land lease.
For the land lease, for the
He will not
property,
be around.
for the property in Oakland that the park is located on. So that is just one part of the total agreement, I am certain, but it's one piece we need to look at. I think it's a lot easier to adjust and to work with that than perhaps the actual original agreement, which we have not been able to find an original of in our records from 37 or however many years ago it was.
I was in elementary school then, but yes. Okay, well, thank you. And in case I don't make that meeting, maybe he could give us a figure on how much we've actually gotten back.
We did the math on that. We did the math on the cost. Teresa, do you recall those numbers?
You don't want to hear that either, Greg.
You don't want to hear
Okay.
that.
It's an investment that, in, when we made this in, what was it, the late 80s, early 90s? No, it was the early 90s, that we thought was a good idea as a town, and it did not pay off. I mean, it did not pay off in the sense of bringing money directly back to us. There are probably people who live in this town that have worked at First Park, at T-Mobile. There's probably some peripheral business that's occurred as a result of it, so I don't think it's a total loss, but I voted yay at that town meeting. And I guess we live and learn, So but when I said the horizon was in sight, I believe we're in the final years of this agreement, and so we will see that sunset, and I don't think we will actually, well, obviously we'll have some discussion with the First Park director and so forth, but I think I can safely say that for myself at least, I don't think we'll be extending First Park for any time whatsoever.
Not if you want to live in town.
Yeah, I know. People know where I live, right?
And I was sincere before and I am now. Thank you again for all
Thank
the
you.
work you've initiated.
Other public questions, comments, feedback, or observations, or speeches?
Are we going to have questions during our time, or is this the appropriate time if I have a question?
We can just segue into that discussion. Let's just make sure the public is
Thank you.
completely exhausted. No, that we've exhausted the opportunity for public feedback, because I want to make sure we do that. So are there other members of the public who would like to say anything? Any committee chairs that want to say anything? Okay, so we'll proceed with the final bit, which is actually to discuss what we heard tonight. And both Andy and I can sort of share this, but anybody who's on the budget committee or select board who would like to talk about their observations tonight or their observations in general of the budget. You've all had this in front of you 15, 20 times. Thank you for coming. And so I know you've spent a lot of time with it, but this is now in the light of having some feedback from the public. So, and you probably, like myself, get feedback from the public at the post office or wherever you happen to be seen in town. So, good opportunity.
So
Catherine.
my question is, Eric, in a minute or less, so it is brief, could you tell me what the repairs planned are for the salt and sand shed?
I've got a piece of rebar in my office that I pulled out of the wall of the concrete structure. It's supposed to be covered by 2 to 3 inches of concrete. It was exposed and rusted through to the point where I literally could just peel it off. We have stored salt-bearing materials in that for the last 20-plus years, 25 years. The concrete is spalling, which is the rust comes out of the rebar behind the concrete, forcing the concrete face to pop off and erode. The salt also kind of deteriorates the concrete, makes it soft. So the repairs that we're looking at are to clean out all the loose material, cut out all the rusted rebar, reinstall wire, mesh, and rebar as appropriate, and then reapply concrete, likely through a process called shotcrete, where they spray out of a hose concrete on, which is actually a really good option for a vertical wall like this without having to actually pay to form it all up and then find ways to put concrete through the holes. And it's just a lot, it's what's done for this type of project. So that's what's being proposed on the foundation. The outside of the wall is in great shape. The roof shingles are in great shape. However, the moisture and salt in the building has started to deteriorate some of the plywood panels on the bottom 10 to 16 feet of that structure, in part because over the past 25 years we've been piling the sand too high, and it's been getting in contact with that. Also, we're putting it away in the summertime when it has a lot of moisture, and that moisture comes out and does rot the wood a little. So we may have some additional costs around that piece, but like I said, if we can accommodate it in our current budget, we will. Otherwise, it will likely be another year repair.
Yeah, these repairs are going on all across the state.
Absolutely.
They're probably, about 3 decades ago, probably half of the municipalities in the state of Maine built to this exact design. It was the bomb. But apparently it worked for about 3 decades. And so the repairs that we're doing are not atypical, and that's why Eric's been able to get numbers from other communities, because they're actually going through the same repair cycle that we are.
That's great, thank you very much, and I hope that means that we'll pile our sand and salt a little lower so it doesn't take out that plywood again.
We will. We're going to have
Awesome.
to have a policy in place and a bit more oversight, so.
Other comments and
On that
thoughts?
same vein, that is probably the worst design for any type of storage building that I've ever seen, especially a sand and salt shed. You put equipment in there and it just doesn't work. I believe you mentioned that you would take a look at, have an engineer take a look at it to come up with a fairly solid number, and then maybe take a look at just getting rid of that building and putting up another one.
Yeah, part of the engineering work that will be done is the repair or replace analysis. And it shouldn't take too much to do that. We know the life of a new structure. We know the potential life of the repairs to the current one, or we will, and we will just do a prorated cost, and whatever is more cost effective and more efficient for meeting our current needs and our functional material handling needs is what we'll recommend. But
Because this isn't the first time that there's been repairs done on this building right along. So it's not like we've been 30 years without doing anything to the building.
yeah, I think the shingles look the last decade or so. So yeah, yep.
Okay.
Yeah. No, it's
This is probably a significant base structural repair, though.
yes, that's how I would describe it. I guess the last thing I wanted to point out too is that we're also going to be spraying that new concrete and the old that's been found to be sound with a salt and moisture repelling film that may or may not have been done when this was built initially, and certainly hasn't been done every 5 to 10 years as it should be to maintain that protective barrier. So,
Excellent.
Marty?
I'm trying to frame this observation and recommendation in a way that doesn't at all imply any criticism. Last year, at the public budget meeting, there were a couple of comments made, one having to do with a feeling that waterfront properties were on the taxes were being subsidized by homeowners who don't have waterfront properties. And there was also a suggestion that we're not doing proper maintenance on equipment. And I feel that whenever residents raise questions like that, that they should be answered. And so I would suggest that in the next public meeting on the budget, that whether or not any member of the public raises those questions, that they be addressed. I've seen some things through the budget committee, like the amazing work that's being done in the fire department to hold things together on some of the older equipment. So I'm sure that, that it's all being done maybe beyond standard. But I think those, those were some critical questions. I think they should be answered.
Yeah, John Perrin on the Select Board. I'm also Chair of the Board of Assessors, and we have a new assessor that is working for us now, and he actually he's retired from the state in the assessing department, so he's very experienced. And he took a look at our shore front properties, and we thought they were down around the 85, 86% of what, obviously, of the 100%, but they aren't. They're more like 94%. And the regular residential properties are at about 96%. So we decided, and I did bring this up at a select board meeting, it wasn't a hearing or anything, that the shoreland properties were up to where they belonged, and he recommended not doing anything with them this year and waiting to see, some more sales and so on for the next year and to see if there's any adjustment there. But he did feel, and we agreed with him, that those two levels are very close to each other as far as actual assessment.
And they've gone up year to year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just suggesting
Yeah.
that.
No, that's a good point.
That was a question that was raised
Yeah.
with a little bit of heat. And I think that it would be good relations with our constituents, even if no one raises the question again, to say, somebody raised this question last year, we've looked into it, and this is what the situation is.
Yeah, good point.
And that's part of the purpose of this very meeting tonight, is to have that kind of discussion. But we'll reiterate that, and your note on maintenance being done is also a very good one to continually address. We certainly, everything I've seen in terms of maintenance, it's certainly a focus. Getting it all into a maintenance department, I think, allows us to categorize and plan a little bit better. But we also don't want to maintain things like this holder to the extent that it becomes a cost issue as well, to basically maintain a bad piece of equipment. So, I think you're right. We do need to address both of those items and make sure that the public knows more about them.
Thank you.
I just would like to say thank you very much to all the members of the Budget Committee. I know it's especially the new folks that we have appointed this year. I'm new to the Select Board. Only till June. And I just want to say that the budget process, I was at this very meeting last year. I was very impressed with the way that Eric was able to explain some very complex accounting issues to someone who does not have a very good understanding of complex accounting issues, and that's me. So I appreciate it. I also want to say that the mailing was also fantastic. I know we wanted more folks here, but I think just the mailing itself proved to be very helpful. So as I continue to be on the Select Board, I continue to hope and keep as a priority making the budget process accessible to everyone, making sure that no one is ever caught off guard. And if there are questions, we were able to find an answer or at least give you some reasoning. And I think that's important. So thank you very much for being here to the public, and thank you very much to the Budget Committee for helping us understand.
Any other members of the Budget Committee or Select Board? John,
I guess
please.
I'd just like to touch on that and also thank I know the work that goes in right from the start, having served on the Budget Committee for quite a few years. All of the committees, commissions, boards who put budgets together and present them to the Budget Committee. They're very, very responsible budgets. There's no bloat in them. It's all work that needs to be done. And then for the Budget Committee to put all of this together with Eric and Teresa, it's really a great job, and I appreciate the work you've done.
Thank you. Then I'll go ahead and wrap things up by saying that, we will have during the month of April at the Select Board the final approval of the warrant, and then we will bring that to a public budget and hearing on April 26th here at 6:30, where we can listen to the public discuss the merits and demerits of each warrant article. And so I look forward to that, and I invite you to please come to that meeting. And I do want to thank people who watched on television. I know we don't know what the viewership is, except when somebody says to me, "You put me to sleep last night, Bruce." And that's an actual thing that somebody said to me.
Well, that's not a bad
And she said that was not a bad thing. But in any case, I want to thank people who do watch us on television and participate by communicating with us. And then finally, of course, our town meeting is by secret ballot on June 12th at the town office, and we want people to turn out and vote on their budget. So thank you. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Could I have a second? All in favor? Thank you.